It began with a letter. A single, crisp envelope taped neatly to the front door, stamped with the HO logo and printed in that stiff, self-important font they always used when they wanted to sound official. Inside, a short notice informed the homeowner, Ellen, that her dog, Bailey, was creating a disturbance inconsistent with community standards. The note cited excessive barking as the issue, claiming that multiple complaints had been filed. Ellen had lived in the Maplewood Grove subdivision for 6 years. She'd bought the small, tidy house after her divorce, wanting a peaceful neighborhood to start over. Bailey, her golden retriever, had been her one constant companion through it all. A gentle, affectionate dog, Bailey rarely barked at anything other than the mailman or the occasional squirrel. Certainly nothing that could be described as excessive. But this was the Maplewood Grove HOA, an entity known less for fostering community and more for policing it. The board was run by a small but zealous group of residents led by their president, a woman named Lorraine. Everyone knew Lorraine. Her silver bob and perpetually pursed lips were as much a fixture of the neighborhood as the manicured lawns and identical mailbox posts. She loved rules the way other people loved hobbies. At first, Ellen tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had complained about a different dog. But when the second letter came, this time warning of a potential fine, she realized it wasn't going away. The letter claimed there had been 5 verified complaints. The phrase verified stuck out to her. Verified by whom? Bailey wasn't loud, not in the way some dogs were. She didn't bark through the night. She didn't howl. And yet, here was this HOA, acting as though she were running a kennel. It was infuriating but also unsettling. Someone, somewhere, had gone out of their way to target her. Over the next few weeks, the letters continued, each one more stern than the last. The HOA accused her of repeated violations, even though no one ever reached out directly. The threats of escalating fines loomed. Ellen started noticing people looking at her differently when she walked Bailey around the block. Polite smiles replaced by side glances and quiet whispers. One evening, she saw Lorraine standing on her porch, clipboard in hand, speaking with another board member. They looked at her, then at Bailey, then back at each other. Lorraine scribbled something down. That's when Ellen realized this wasn't about noise. It was about control. The HOA had long been known for targeting minor infractions. Mailboxes painted slightly off-color, lawns that grew half an inch too tall, Christmas lights left up a week too long. But this was personal. Maybe it was because Ellen hadn't volunteered for any HOA committees. Maybe it was because she'd once refused to donate to their annual neighborhood beautification fund. Whatever it was, she was in their crosshairs now. Then, one morning, she found a new letter waiting for her. This one wasn't a notice. It was a citation. A $2.50 fine for continued noise disruption. It didn't even pretend to be polite. She felt her stomach twist as she read it. It was the principle of it now, not just the money. They were accusing her of something she knew wasn't true, and they were confident she couldn't prove otherwise. That night, as Bailey slept curled at her feet, Ellen made a decision. If they wanted to play that game, she'd give them a game they couldn't win. The next day, she bought a set of audio recorders online, small, discreet, high quality. She placed one in her backyard, another near her front window, and a third by her bedroom door. They ran continuously, recording everything every hour of every day. At first, she felt ridiculous, paranoid even. But within a week, she had over 100 hours of audio, and not a single instance of excessive barking. Bailey barked maybe 3 or 4 times a day, short bursts, nothing unusual. It was proof, real undeniable proof. So when the next HOA notice arrived, another fine, this time $500, Ellen finally felt calm. She didn't get angry. She didn't panic. She simply gathered her recordings, printed the timestamps, and compiled a neat little evidence packet. Then she emailed it to the HOA board, keeking every member, and politely requested that all fines be revoked, citing her documented evidence. She didn't hear anything back for 3 days. Then, a short reply arrived from Lorraine herself. "Thank you for your email. The board will review the matter and respond accordingly." It sounded professional, reasonable, almost too reasonable. But the next week, when the HOA's monthly meeting rolled around, Ellen received another letter, this one hand-delivered to her mailbox. It said that her attendance at the next board meeting was strongly recommended to discuss ongoing community concerns. She knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to corner her, but they didn't know one thing. Those recorders she'd bought. They didn't just record barking. They recorded everything, and she had a new plan. If the HOA wanted to talk about community concerns, she was going to record them. Every word, every false accusation, every smug dismissal. The day of the meeting, she slipped her smallest recorder into her jacket pocket before walking to the clubhouse. The room was already half full. Board members sitting in their usual spots, neighbors whispering. The smell of coffee and paper mingling in the air. Lorraine sat at the head of the table, her clipboard gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The meeting began with its usual routine. Budget updates, landscaping discussions, minor rule changes. But eventually, Lorraine cleared her throat and announced the final agenda item. Noise complaints regarding Lot 17. All eyes turned toward Ellen, and as Lorraine began to speak, her voice measured, her tone dripping with authority, Ellen pressed the small button in her pocket, starting the recording. She didn't know it yet, but that single action would change everything, because what she captured that night wasn't just about her dog. It was about what really went on behind those HOA doors. The favoritism, the petty vendettas, the misuse of funds, the lies. By the time the meeting ended, Ellen knew she'd uncovered something far bigger than a barking complaint. And Lorraine had no idea that her carefully rehearsed power trip was now preserved forever, on tape. The night of the meeting left a heavy silence in Ellen's house. Bailey slept soundly at the foot of the bed, blissfully unaware that his soft snoring had somehow become the spark for something much larger. Ellen lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of her recorder's charging light blinking in the corner. She hadn't yet listened to what she captured, but she could feel it. There had been tension in that room, a barely restrained arrogance in Lorraine's tone, and whispers exchanged when they thought she wasn't paying attention. The next morning, she sat at her kitchen table with a mug of coffee, laptop open, and pressed play. At first, the recording sounded exactly as expected. The rustle of papers, the murmur of small talk, the clinking of pens against clipboards. Then, Lorraine's voice cut through, sharp, clear, and dripping with that bureaucratic confidence she wielded like a sword. She listened as Lorraine summarized ongoing noise concerns, her words carefully chosen to sound professional. But then, beneath the polished phrasing, came something else. A chuckle, not from Lorraine, but from one of the other board members. A man's voice, slightly muffled but distinct enough to catch. "Honestly," he said, his tone mocking, "that dog barely barks. This is about that shed she put up, isn't it?" There was a pause. Then Lorraine's voice again, quieter this time, the kind of whisper meant only for nearby ears. "Exactly. The shed violates the color scheme. We'll get her one way or another. The dog is just easier to prove." And Ellen froze. The words hit her like a cold wave. It wasn't about Bailey at all. It was a setup. The noise violation was just a pretext, a manufactured excuse to penalize her for something else. She replayed the segment several times, just to be sure she heard it right. The implication was crystal clear. Lorraine and her board had been conspiring to fine her, not for any legitimate reason, but out of personal dislike. As she kept listening, it got worse. She heard them mock her name. Heard one board member joke about the single lady with the mutt. Heard Lorraine instruct the group to document additional complaints, to build a record, even if no one actually heard any barking. Ellen's hand trembled as she stopped the recording. This wasn't just harassment. It was corruption. A small-scale tyranny hiding behind bylaws and fine print. Over the next few days, she began combing through all her recordings. The device near her window had captured snippets of outdoor chatter, too. People walking by, neighbors gossiping. Twice, she caught Lorraine's voice again, standing near the fence, making comments about unapproved paint tones and disruptive elements. Every word strengthened her case. By the end of the week, she had over 10 hours of solid evidence. Proof that the HOA board had falsified claims, conspired to levy unfair fines, and even discussed using resident complaints as leverage against homeowners they didn't like. But Ellen wasn't impulsive. She wanted to do this right. She started by researching the HOA's charter, their governing documents, bylaws, and code of ethics. Hidden deep within, she found a section outlining conflicts of interest and abuse of authority. According to their own rules, what the board had done was grounds for immediate suspension. Still, she needed more than just recordings. She needed credibility, so she began quietly talking to neighbors. Not in a confrontational way, but with gentle curiosity. She asked if anyone else had received sudden fines or warnings lately. To her surprise, several said yes, some for yard decorations, others for minor fence repairs or garden changes. And in every case, the complaints had come shortly after those residents had declined to donate to the HOA's beautification fund. A pattern was forming. Lorraine's HOA wasn't about keeping the neighborhood nice. It was about control and favoritism. Those who complied were left alone. Those who didn't were targeted. Ellen compiled every story she could find, every document, every notice, every timestamp. Then, she organized it all into a digital folder labeled Simply Proof. That weekend, the HOA held its next meeting. This time, Ellen didn't attend in person. She stayed home, recording again, though she didn't expect much new information. What she didn't anticipate, however, was that one of her newly allied neighbors, Tom from down the street, would attend and leave his phone recording too. When he sent her the file later that night, what she heard made her blood run cold. Lorraine was angry, furious even. She was ranting about people who don't know their place, about snitches and meddlers, about members who think they can challenge authority. Her voice cracked with frustration as she demanded that the board find something on Ellen, anything that could stick. They were escalating. Ellen sat there listening in disbelief, realizing just how deep Lorraine's obsession went. This wasn't simply about power. It was about ego. Lorraine couldn't stand being challenged. She needed to win, no matter the cost. That's when Ellen decided she was done playing defense. She created a new folder, this one labeled HO Audio Recordings Full Transparency. Then she uploaded every file she had to a public drive. She included dates, times, and brief summaries of what each recording contained. Finally, she wrote a short, factual post for the neighborhood's online forum, including a link to the drive. The post went live at midnight. By morning, it had been viewed hundreds of times. Residents who'd stayed quiet before now came forward, posting their own stories, screenshots, and documents. The HOA's carefully maintained image of control began to unravel in real time. Lorraine must have seen it too, because by noon, a special emergency meeting was announced for that evening. The notice said it would address misinformation being circulated online. Ellen smiled to herself. She already knew what they'd say. She also knew what she'd do next. This time, she wouldn't just record them. She'd expose them. Completely, publicly, and undeniably. By the time the emergency meeting began, the neighborhood was buzzing with tension. Residents who'd once avoided HO drama now gathered at the community center, their faces hard with curiosity and quiet anger. Ellen didn't attend, at least not in person. She sat at home, laptop open, streaming the meeting through the HOA's online portal. They had started broadcasting meetings months ago for transparency, a decision Lorraine was surely regretting now. The board members sat in their usual semicircle at the long table, but something was different this time. Gone was their smug composure. Lorraine's expression was taut, her usual poise slipping as she tried to maintain order in the room. Beside her, two of the board members looked uneasy, avoiding her eyes. She began with a speech. Her voice was sharper than usual, her tone clipped. She described the recordings as heavily edited and taken out of context. She insisted that the board had always acted within its authority and that certain individuals were spreading misinformation to undermine community unity. But the problem for Lorraine was simply, too many people had already heard the truth. The residents in the audience weren't the same timid crowd they once were. People who had stayed silent for years now spoke up, one after another. They described the same pattern of petty fines, intimidation, and selective enforcement. One woman stood up and read excerpts from Ellen's shared transcripts. Word for word, Lorraine's voice captured in her own plotting. Lorraine tried to shut her down, but the murmurs grew into a low roar of outrage. For the first time, the HOA board was losing control of its audience. Ellen sat watching it unfold, a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief washing over her. Months of frustration, fear, and helplessness, all finally boiling over into collective defiance. But she wasn't done yet. She'd anticipated that Lorraine would call the recordings fake. So, earlier that day, she had sent a copy of them directly to the county's Community Oversight Office, the same office responsible for auditing OA conduct. She had also sent copies to a few local journalists known for covering small-town corruption stories. Within an hour of the meeting's start, her inbox began filling with replies. A reporter from the local news station confirmed they were reviewing the evidence. Another email came from a city compliance officer asking to schedule an interview. Ellen's quiet campaign had just gone public. Meanwhile, the meeting continued to spiral. Lorraine, in a desperate attempt to regain control, announced that the HOA would be filing a defamation claim against whoever had posted the recordings. But her threat fell flat when one of her own board members, a man named Victor, interrupted her to say that he wanted his name removed from any board action related to the matter. He said clearly and loudly that he had not consented to any of the behavior heard on those tapes. The room erupted. People began shouting questions about the beautification fund, about the fake complaints, about how fines were calculated. Lorraine tried to gavel the room back into silence, but every hit of the gavel seemed to make it worse. Her voice cracked, her composure crumbling piece by piece as the very residents she had lorded over for years demanded answers. By the end of the meeting, 2 board members had resigned on the spot. Lorraine announced she would be taking a short leave of absence, though everyone could see it wasn't voluntary. Ellen closed her laptop, heart racing. She didn't cheer or smile. She just sat there, absorbing the enormity of what had happened. She'd done it. She had turned the power dynamic upside down. But she also knew it wasn't over. People like Lorraine didn't disappear quietly. They regrouped, they schemed, they found new angles. And sure enough, the next morning, Ellen woke to a series of emails from the OA's official account. They claimed that the OA's legal team was reviewing potential privacy violations stemming from her recordings. They accused her of unlawful surveillance and defamation. They even threatened civil consequences if she didn't remove all materials and issue a public apology. Ellen didn't panic. She had already spoken to a lawyer, a former HOA consultant who now specialized in homeowner defense. His advice had been simple. As long as she hadn't recorded inside private residences or non-public spaces, she was entirely within her rights. HOA meetings, especially those held in common areas, were not private events, so she ignored the threats. But Lorraine didn't stop there. Over the next few days, anonymous notes began appearing in Ellen's mailbox, scrawled messages on plain paper. Hope you're proud of yourself. You've ruined everything. People like you don't belong here. It was pathetic, almost desperate. But it also showed that Lorraine was losing control in the only way she knew how, by lashing out. Meanwhile, the story had started spreading. The local paper ran a small feature titled, HOA Under Fire After Secret Recordings Reveal Abuse of Power. The piece didn't name Ellen directly, but everyone in the neighborhood knew who it was about. Soon, the story was picked up by a local TV segment, complete with audio clips from the recordings, Lorraine's unmistakable voice echoing across the broadcast. The HOA's reputation was shredded overnight. Within a week, a city investigator visited Maplewood Grove. They interviewed several residents, reviewed the financial records, and began a full audit. What they found only deepened the scandal. Irregularities in spending, unexplained fees, and missing receipts tied to Lorraine's beautification projects. It wasn't just about Bailey anymore. It was about corruption that had gone unchecked for years. The investigation dragged on for weeks, but its outcome was clear from the beginning. Lorraine was removed as HOA president permanently. The entire board was disbanded pending re-election. The HOA's finances were frozen until a third-party audit could be completed. And Ellen, she became something of a quiet local hero. Neighbors who had once avoided her now smiled and waved. People thanked her for standing up, for exposing what everyone had suspected but never proved. Bailey, oblivious to his newfound fame, simply wagged his tail, happy to receive the extra treats from grateful residents. Still, in the back of her mind, Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that Lorraine wasn't gone for good. There were whispers that she was appealing the decision, threatening lawsuits, even trying to form a new HOA splinter group. It didn't matter. Ellen had something she hadn't felt in a long time, control. And if Lorraine wanted to try again, she'd be ready. Because this time, Ellen wasn't the one being watched. The weeks following the HOA scandal were eerily calm. For the first time in months, there were no letters on Ellen's door, no whispers when she walked Bailey through the neighborhood. The air felt lighter, the neighbors friendlier, and the sidewalks, once tense with judgment, were filled again with laughter and conversation. But calm rarely lasts in a place built on power and pride. Lorraine might have lost her title, but she hadn't lost her obsession. She vanished from public view after her removal. No more clipboard walks, no more meetings. But her presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of every conversation. Residents would occasionally mention seeing her car parked at odd hours, her silver SUV lurking near the clubhouse or by the mailboxes. Others reported receiving calls from a community outreach group that seemed suspiciously similar to the old HOA, complete with talk of reclaiming the neighborhood's integrity. Ellen tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just paranoia. But that changed one morning when she woke up to the sharp sound of Bailey barking at the back door. Her heart pounded as she went to check. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just her quiet backyard still heavy with dew. But then she spotted it, a small hand-painted sign staked into the grass right by her fence. The lettering was uneven, rushed, but the message was unmistakable, barking still a problem. Keep it down. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't just a taunt. It was a message. Someone had been in her yard. She checked her security cameras. The footage from overnight showed a figure in dark clothing, slipping through the side gate around midnight. The person moved quickly, glancing around before planting the sign and disappearing back into the shadows. The face wasn't visible, but the build, the walk, it was unmistakable. Lorraine. Ellen reported the incident to the police, who filed a report but could do little without a clearer ID. Still, the message was clear. Lorraine wasn't finished. Over the next week, more strange things started happening. Flyers appeared on doorsteps claiming Ellen had manipulated the recordings and cost the community thousands in legal fees. A few residents, mostly those who'd once been close to Lorraine, started treating her coldly again. Someone even posted on the neighborhood forum, calling her vindictive and unstable. The tone was identical to Lorraine's writing style. But Ellen didn't crumble this time. She was prepared. She installed additional cameras, upgraded her lighting, and even bought a motion-activated alarm for her backyard. She also began documenting every incident. The flyers, the messages, the social media posts, each one saved neatly in a new folder she labeled Retaliation. While she wasn't going to let history repeat itself, then came the most audacious move yet. One afternoon, Ellen received a notice from the County Animal Control Department. It claimed that multiple complaints had been filed alleging that Bailey was aggressive and had bitten another dog. The letter said an officer would be visiting to assess whether Bailey was a safety risk. Ellen felt her stomach twist. It was the same playbook as before, but this time Lorraine had escalated it beyond the OA. When the officer arrived, Bailey greeted him with a wagging tail and gentle eyes. The officer took one look at the golden retriever sitting politely by Ellen's feet and raised an eyebrow. After a short inspection, he confirmed there was no record of any incident matching the description in the complaint. He admitted, quietly, that the report seemed malicious. Ellen thanked him and, after he left, called her lawyer. Together, they filed a formal harassment claim against Lorraine, citing repeated false reports and stalking behavior. But before the paperwork was even processed, another event rocked the neighborhood. Late one night, the old HOA clubhouse, the same building where all the meetings had taken place, was vandalized. Windows smashed, graffiti scrawled across the walls. The words painted in large, uneven letters read, "No more bullies." By morning, the rumor mill was in overdrive. Some residents whispered that Ellen had done it out of revenge. Others said it was a random act. A few even claimed Lorraine herself had staged it to frame someone. Ellen knew better than to engage. Instead, she reviewed her camera footage again, and what she found changed everything. At 11:47 p.m., her front-facing camera had caught a glimpse of that same silver SUV driving past her house, heading toward the clubhouse. An hour later, it came back the other way. The timing lined up perfectly. Ellen shared the footage with the police. Within days, Lorraine was brought in for questioning. Though she denied everything, the circumstantial evidence was piling up. Combined with Ellen's previous reports, it painted a clear picture of harassment and retaliation. For the first time, Lorraine wasn't just facing social fallout, she was facing legal consequences. The tension in Maplewood Grove reached its breaking point. Some residents were furious at the disruption. Others quietly celebrated that justice might finally be coming. The community, once so rigidly controlled, now stood divided between those who wanted to move on and those still clinging to Lorraine's old reign. Ellen stayed quiet through it all. She knew the truth had a way of speaking louder than any argument. A few weeks later, Lorraine sold her house. The silver SUV disappeared. The listing stayed up for barely a day before being marked, sold, purchased by a private buyer under an unfamiliar name. Just like that, she was gone, or so it seemed. Because one evening, as Ellen sat on her porch with Bailey beside her, she received a message from an unknown number. No name, no greeting, just a single sentence. You may have won this round, but you don't know who you're really dealing with. The number traced back to an unregistered phone. The police said there was little they could do unless it continued. Ellen stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. She thought she'd reached the end of this nightmare, but now she realized something deeper was at play. Something that wasn't just about HOA politics anymore. It was about revenge. And Lorraine, wherever she was, wasn't done yet. Months passed since Lorraine's departure, and Maplewood Grove began to heal. At least on the surface. Without her influence, the community restructured its HOA, this time with real transparency. Meetings were open, financial records were posted publicly, and fines had to be approved by multiple board members before being issued. Ellen attended every meeting not as a troublemaker, but as a quiet observer. People respected her now, some even admired her. The woman who once symbolized defiance had become the unexpected guardian of fairness. Even Bailey, once branded a nuisance, was now the unofficial mascot of the neighborhood. But peace is fragile, and sometimes it only takes a whisper to shatter it. It began with a rumor. Someone claimed that Lorraine was planning to sue the HOA for wrongful termination. Another said she'd bought property nearby under an alias. A third insisted she'd been seen at the coffee shop just outside the neighborhood, wearing a scarf and sunglasses, watching from a corner booth. Ellen dismissed it all at first. Rumors had always been Maplewood Grove's favorite sport, but deep down she couldn't shake the unease. Lorraine was unpredictable, calculating, and most of all, relentless. Her fears were confirmed one morning when a new notice appeared on the HOA bulletin board. It wasn't official, but it was printed on the same stationery Lorraine used back when she was president. The headline read, Special Community Meeting, Discussion of Misconduct and Mismanagement. The date was set for the following week. No one on the new board had issued it. No one knew who had printed it. But the location, Maplewood Community Center, was real, and the residents, curious and hungry for drama, began talking. Ellen knew she had to go. When the night arrived, the community center was packed. Dozens of residents filled the folding chairs, murmuring in confusion. The current board members sat near the front, trying to maintain order, but there was no mistaking the tension in the air. Then, just as the clock struck 7, the doors at the back creaked open. Lorraine stepped inside. Her once perfect hair was shorter now, her expression sharper. She wore a crisp navy suit and carried a stack of papers under her arm. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned. She walked straight to the front of the room, ignoring the murmurs, and placed her papers on the podium like she had never left. Ellen watched from the second row, her heart pounding. She hadn't seen Lorraine since the day of the police investigation. Seeing her now felt surreal, like a ghost had wandered back into the living world. Lorraine began to speak. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, dripping with the same cold confidence that had once ruled the neighborhood. She claimed that the HOA's current leadership was corrupt, that the financial audit had been incomplete, and that the recordings Ellen had leaked were digitally altered. She said she had proof. Bank statements, emails, testimony from former associates. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some residents looked skeptical, but others, especially the few who had always supported her, nodded along. Then, Lorraine turned her attention directly to Ellen. Without saying her name, she described a vindictive individual who had illegally recorded private meetings, slandered innocent people, and damaged property to frame others. Ellen's stomach tightened. Lorraine was rewriting the story, casting herself as the victim and Ellen as the aggressor. But Ellen had come prepared. When Lorraine paused to shuffle her papers, Ellen quietly pulled out her phone and began recording again. This time not secretly, openly. Everyone could see the glowing red light on her screen. Lorraine noticed. For the first time, her expression faltered. Her voice wavered. The current HO president, an older man named Robert, stood and interrupted, demanding that Lorraine explain who authorized this meeting. She tried to deflect, saying the people had invited her, but no one could confirm it. Then Robert revealed something that silenced the room entirely. The HOA's legal team had received notice earlier that week that Lorraine was under formal investigation, not just for harassment, but for embezzlement. The county audit had uncovered missing funds linked directly to accounts she controlled. The evidence was overwhelming, and now, standing in front of the very people she had deceived, Lorraine's empire finally cracked. Her defiance evaporated. She shuffled her papers, searching for control she no longer had. Her supporters looked away, suddenly unsure. Someone from the back muttered that they'd had enough. Another called for her to leave. Ellen stayed seated, silent, her recording still running. When Lorraine realized no one was listening, she snapped. Her voice rose, accusing everyone of betrayal, of cowardice, of believing lies. But the more she spoke, the less power her words carried. The room wasn't afraid of her anymore. Finally, Robert motioned for security, and Lorraine was escorted out. The door closed behind her with a heavy finality. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension dissolved into a collective exhale. Ellen stopped recording, lowering her phone slowly. Around her, neighbors turned and nodded in quiet gratitude. The nightmare that had haunted Maplewood Grove for so long had ended, not with violence or chaos, but with truth finally winning out. That night, Ellen uploaded the recording to a private folder, just in case. She'd learned that in a world ruled by appearances and manipulation, evidence was the strongest weapon. The next morning, Lorraine's house, what remained of it, was listed for foreclosure. Her accounts were frozen pending investigation. She disappeared again, this time for good, or so everyone believed. But 3 weeks later, Ellen received a letter, no return address, no signature. Inside was a single printed photograph. Lorraine, sitting in what looked like a cafe, staring directly at the camera. On the back, written in neat block letters, was a single line, "I told you, I'm not done yet." Ellen folded the photo and placed it in her desk drawer, right next to her recordings and documents. She didn't show anyone, not yet, because if Lorraine was planning something, Ellen intended to be ready long before it began. The weeks after Lorraine's public collapse felt like the calm after a storm. Uneasy, too still, like the air before lightning strikes again. The neighborhood returned to its routine. The lawns were trimmed, the fences repaired, the chatter in the park shifted from scandal to small talk. But for Ellen, peace no longer felt natural. It felt staged. Every creak of the floorboards after dark made her pause. Every car that lingered too long outside her house made her check the blinds. Bailey, ever alert, had started barking again at night. Short, cautious bursts toward the shadows near the hedges. Ellen told herself it was just instinct, but deep down she knew. Lorraine wasn't gone. Not really. The letter, the photo, they weren't empty threats. They were breadcrumbs. And Ellen had learned long ago that Lorraine didn't play games without an end goal. Still, Ellen went on with her days, determined not to give her fear any more oxygen. The HOA was stabilizing under new leadership. The investigation had expanded into a full-blown legal case, uncovering a web of fraudulent expenses under Lorraine's old term. Her name was circulating in local media again, this time attached to words like embezzlement and harassment. Every headline felt like justice. Yet Ellen couldn't shake the tension coiling in her chest. Justice on paper wasn't always safety in reality. Then, one night, it happened. It was nearly midnight when Ellen woke to the faint crackle of sound, static, faint but rhythmic, echoing from the living room. She sat up, heart pounding. Bailey growled softly at the foot of the bed, ears perked. She followed the noise downstairs, each step careful, deliberate. The sound grew louder, clearer. It was coming from her laptop, left open on the coffee table. The screen glowed softly, showing her home security app, the feed from her cameras. But something was off. The footage wasn't live. It was playing a recording from earlier that evening, an automatic clip triggered by motion. The timestamp showed 8:43 p.m. Ellen frowned, confused. She'd been home then, reading upstairs. Nothing unusual had happened. She clicked play. At first, she saw nothing but her quiet front yard washed in pale light from the porch lamp. Then, from the far corner, a figure stepped into frame. A woman, short hair, dark coat, and a scarf covering most of her face. But Ellen knew that posture, that stride, sharp, purposeful, unhurried, Lorraine. Ellen's pulse quickened as she watched the woman approach her mailbox, slip something inside, then pause. For a moment, the figure turned toward the camera. The scarf didn't hide everything. The eyes, cold and deliberate, were unmistakable. And then she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that said, "I'm still here." Ellen froze, staring at the paused frame. She reached for her phone, dialing the local police, but stopped halfway. She knew what they'd say, that there was no direct threat, that they'd file a report, that it would go on record. But Lorraine was too careful for that. She never left enough evidence to be caught outright. Ellen needed something undeniable. So she did what she had done before. She prepared. For the next few days, Ellen upgraded her system again. External hard drives, off-site cloud backups, multiple cameras hidden in plain sight. She set up automated alerts and motion sensors tied to her phone. And this time, she didn't stop there. She planted decoys, fake documents labeled with O-related terms, meant to draw attention if anyone broke in. If Lorraine came again, Ellen would have proof. Days turned into weeks. Nothing happened. Until the night of the HOA's one-year Reformation anniversary. The community had planned a modest gathering in the park. Potluck tables, string lights, music. Ellen attended reluctantly, more to show normalcy than to celebrate. People laughed again, children played, Bailey lay content by her chair. It was almost peaceful, until her phone buzzed. Emotion alert. Front door camera movement detected. Ellen's stomach dropped. She excused herself, rushing home with Bailey at her side. The walk that usually felt short now stretched endlessly. Her mind ran through possibilities. A delivery, an animal, maybe a false trigger. But when she reached her driveway, her breath caught. Her front door was slightly ajar. She entered cautiously, flashlight in hand. The house was quiet, too quiet. A cold draft crept from the hallway, and Bailey's fur bristled as they moved room to room. Nothing seemed missing, not the electronics, not the jewelry. Then Ellen saw it. On the kitchen counter sat a small, portable recorder. An old-fashioned voice device, cheap, the kind reporters used decades ago. Its red light blinked slowly, signaling playback mode. She pressed the button. A voice filled the air, distorted by static but unmistakable. "Lorraine, you think you've won, Ellen. You think recording me made you safe. But you forget, I learned from you." The message paused briefly, a faint breath audible through the speaker. "I don't need a neighborhood to control anymore. I just need you to remember who made you this careful." The tape clicked to a stop. Ellen's hand trembled as she turned it over. Taped to the bottom was a note. 5 words. "The last recording is yours." The meaning hit her like a wave. Lorraine wasn't just threatening her. She was framing the story, forcing Ellen to live inside the same paranoia she'd once used to expose her. The predator had become the ghost, haunting her with her own weapon. Ellen called the police immediately this time. They arrived within minutes, swept the house, collected the recorder. They promised to trace the fingerprints, to check nearby security footage. But when Ellen pulled up her own camera feeds again, the footage from that night was gone. Every single recording from the past 12 hours. Deleted. Someone had breached her system. The investigation stretched on, but no trace of Lorraine was ever found. The fingerprints were smudged. The mail records led nowhere. The photo from before, the letter, the recorder, they were all that remained, chilling reminders of someone who refused to disappear. In time, Ellen sold her house. The memories were too heavy, the silence too loud. She moved to a quiet property outside town. No HOA, no neighbors, just space and trees and peace. But every night before bed, she checked her cameras. She still kept backups, still watched for motion alerts, still kept Bailey close. And once in a while, her phone would buzz with a notification that made her heart skip. Unknown IP login detected. Each time, she'd change her password, reset the system, tell herself it was nothing. But she always saved the alerts in a folder labeled simply hair, because deep down, Ellen knew Lorraine wasn't gone. She'd just moved to a different kind of neighborhood. One without fences, where recordings never really die, and where power isn't in the HOA anymore, but in the story itself. And somewhere, on some unseen device, another red light blinked quietly in the dark. Recording.